So welcome back, all of you who are here, all of you who are online. Again, it is wonderful to be with you today. It is now my great pleasure to introduce to you our keynote speaker for today. And similarly to our last session, I invite each and every one of you to be thinking of questions, of topics of conversation that you would like to ask as well. The Reverend Dr. Erin Raffety is a practical theologian who uses ethnographic methods to study Christian congregations and communities. She is currently a lecturer in the Princeton Writing Program, where she teaches on disability justice. At Princeton Theological Seminary, she serves as the senior researcher on the Isaiah Partnership, the Empirical Research Consultant on the Imagining Church Project, and the Associate Research Scholar for the Institute for Youth Ministry. From 2000 to 2023, she served as a research fellow at the Center for Theological Inquiry, where she built and studied a Minecraft video game for disabled Christians in their congregations, and conducted a study on worship access for Christians living with long COVID and chronic illness. She's the recipient of numerous grants from the Calvin Institute for Christian Worship, the Lilly Endowment, the Louisville Institute, and the Templeton World Charity Foundation. She's also the author of 2 books, one on disability ministry in the United States, entitled From Inclusion to Justice, and the other on foster care in China, entitled Families We Need. Please join me in welcoming the Reverend Dr. Erin Raffety.
Thank you so much, Zach, and thank you to Eastern University and Palmer Seminary. It's great to be here today. I just wanted to point out in the bio, I ran this project that I'll be talking about, the Spiritual Loop Project, for only 2 years. So it was from 2020 to 2022. And then the research that I've been doing with folks living with long COVID and chronic illness has just been in the last year. I think Zach managed to give me a lot more credit in acting like I'd done this research for 20 years. And I'm like, oh, no. This is new stuff that I get to talk to you all about today. So, I'm just going to get us started with an introduction to digital culture. Before I talk about this research with the Spiritual Loop video game, I want to kind of dig into some of the research I've been doing with Christian congregations before and during the pandemic. And I think in order to even talk about AI, as we've been doing this morning, what it is, what it does, and what our relationship can be to it, we've got to understand just a little bit about who we are in digital culture. So digital culture, I didn't do a great job citing my terms on this slide, so I just want to say off the top that a lot of the work that and the terms that I'm working with here, digital culture, technological hesitancy, digital reluctance, and this network religion, all come from my colleague, Heidi Campbell, who's been doing really important work on digital religion she really has been doing it over the last 20 years. But when we talk about digital culture, we're talking about this sense that our lives, both online and offline, have become highly enmeshed. And you see in the little decal there, we're thinking of computers and phones, right? All the technology that we interact with in our daily lives. And this stands in contradistinction to the term digital dualism. And that's a term that Heidi doesn't get credit for. That's Nathan Jurgensen's term. And I want to suggest that lurking in our minds is actually this false binary of digital dualism. So digital dualism is the misconception that online and offline spaces are separate. And we may not do this, we may not talk about culture this way, but a lot of times in our minds, we're kind of switching back and forth between these two spaces and these two hats. But we've already been talking today about a lot of the ways that that's really not possible to speak of separate online and offline spaces anymore. Can anybody think of an example of that? How these spaces are actually more connected? We don't have separate online and offline spaces. Anything come to mind? Yeah.
Bullying is one thing, but then even in your faith, right? If you're growing up, you can see anything from Sanskrit to English to Greek to, and what does that do
Hmm.
Different, right? You were where you were, and now you have access to pretty much everything ever written, right?
Yeah, so a ton of access, right? Explosive access in a digital way that then impacts maybe how we learn in quote unquote. See, this is the difference. Real time, right? It's not that the offline space is false, right? Or the online space is false and the offline space is real. Any other examples of kind of that idea of that hybridity in digital culture? Yeah, online and offline are integrated.
Yeah, some of my children's religious education is only on Zoom. It's particularly parents' interactions with that, but literally you can't do it in person.
Yeah. Absolutely. So education, I mean, I even saw on the sign over here for Eastern, St. David's, Philadelphia, Harrisburg, online, right? And we wouldn't say that the folks who are online are not part of the community, right? So then we get to this concept at the bottom of networked religion, where we're actually thinking about our Christian communities in different ways, and we need to be thinking about them in different ways because we practice faith and religion in different ways. And one of the things, we were talking about the advent of the internet just a couple minutes ago, one of the things Heidi was talking about even in 2013, she was saying, one of the fears has been for the last decade that people would plug in, log on, and drop out of society and church and different social relationships. But what scholars have found is that people online are importing their belief structures and understandings into that new space. The internet is not transforming religion. In many respects, what it is doing is just reflecting these broader shifts that are also happening online. So we talked about that, a lot of the fears that we had about the internet and how it would change Christian community. It has changed Christian community. We are more, I think to your comment, diffuse, right? Like we're connected with people around the globe. I was thinking this morning as I was driving here, I used this Lectio Divina prayer app, and it's based out of the UK. So like all the folks that I'm hearing are those voices, but I don't, go to the church. I don't go to church in the UK, right? But I am participating in some way in that community. I'm at least consuming it. And there's a lot more kind of interactive ways that we're, actually like worshiping together online in this day and age. So this idea of networked religion, I think, can be really helpful. There's a lot of other attributes that go with it that I don't have time to necessarily describe. But with this digital dualism also comes two features of the way people interact with technology. And again, these are Heidi's terms: technological hesitancy and digital reluctance. So technological hesitancy are people that are just afraid of the unknown. And we've been talking a lot about the unknown when it comes to AI this morning. But I wanted to start with kind of this base of digital culture and technological hesitancy, because this is where a lot of people are at, right? That they're still kind of fearful of what they don't know. And that might be older folks in congregations, right? But it also might just be folks who don't have access, right? Or for whom technology, they have limited access. And then there's digital reluctance. There's folks who don't want to change the way they've been doing things. And we just went through an extreme period of change with the pandemic, and a lot of folks are really pushing to get back to quote unquote normal. So what does that look like? So one explosive area of tech use when it comes to this digital culture looks like this. And this is video gaming. And I said I wanted to talk to you today about machine learning and video gaming. And video gaming is, truly a place where folks are gathering and playing together online. And I want to kind of go through some myths about video gaming, because I think sometimes these loom large for us in our common culture, but also in the church. So one myth about video gaming is that it's just for kids, right? So you see some kids on this slide playing games. But actually, many adults play games as well. The average age for a female video gamer is 44 years old, and the average age for a male video gamer is 35. So when we think about just children, or we think about teens, it's actually a lot of adults that are playing games. And then also a lot of those folks are female. So we think of men playing games or young men playing games, but it's 46% female in terms of the gaming population. And I think the image that you come in today in terms of our identifying our own biases of maybe like the guy in the corner there of like alone, maybe in his like dorm room or his like basement room in his parents' house, playing games by himself, totally checking out of everything, maybe with lots of pizza strewn around him, solitary, right? That is actually not what's often going on when it comes to video gaming spaces. In fact, it's a space of a lot of connection, and I did tons of research, like I said, over the last couple of years with folks who play video games, and I have never experienced such unbridled joy. Oh my God, when you're talking to people about video games, like I wish they had that much joy when they were talking about Jesus because they are on fire. They love it, right? It's a site of joy and connection in their lives. So our thought with this project is like, why don't we go to these spaces where folks are gathering together, where they are connecting with one another, where they're collaborating, and see what it means for the life of the church. Before I get to that point, I just want to say, the problem with a lot of these biases that we kind of carry into this conversation are that they actually bear out in the scholarly conversation as well. So while folks like Heidi Campbell are doing really good work on digital religion, there is actually a neglect when it comes to studying this intersection between digital games and religion. And so Heidi Campbell and Gregory Grieve in their book, Playing with Religion and Digital Games, say that this field has been neglected for 4 primary reasons. One I just shared with you. Video games are demeaned as mere youth entertainment. Second, this will probably like send your spidey sense off. They have been devalued as an artificial form of expression. Third, technology is thought of as secular. And finally, virtual gaming worlds are seen as unreal. So you see in here a lot of demeaning of kind of, this stuff doesn't matter. It's not real. It's only for children. So my question today is like, well, what if it does matter, though? Like, what if it is real? And what if it matters in this world of AI, artificial intelligence? And we heard a couple references to this on the panel that artificial intelligence, I mean, I think about that digital dualism, it can really be perceived in kind of hyperbolic ways as well, right? It's like a threat to religion. It's highly secular. Maybe it's God itself. So I'm going to try to kind of bring this down into maybe practical kind of everyday world and video gaming, and think a little bit about what we can learn about, in our everyday lives, right? What this, machine learning, artificial intelligence, machine intelligence looks like. So in the study we were asking this question: can machine intelligence be used to enhance the spiritual lives of disabled persons? And I'm gonna try to break down that question. It was admittedly like a very audacious question for this tiny little study, and I don't know that we have like great answers. We have more questions. That's what happens often when you do research. But what do we mean by AI? We were kind of parsing through this today, and I think the panel did a really good job describing some of the differences between artificial intelligence, machine learning, and machine intelligence. I'm going to talk about this in the context of video gaming because it's very different, and I hate to disappoint our AI experts, but it's kind of very bare bones. In the video gaming world, you all might know a little bit about this. So when it comes to video gaming, the type of AI that you think about where it's like teaching software to recognize objects in photos or translate text into different languages is software that game developers have largely avoided. And the reason for that is that good games actually have this level of kind of predictability built into them that gamers like. So I'll go to the next slide and kind of talk about some of these aspects of machine intelligence. So I'm focusing on that machine intelligence, a subset of AI here, a capability of technology. This is very, very bare bones. It's just like algorithms, right? Programmed in that do some sort of deductive logic and in some ways kind of mimic aspects of human intelligence. But gamers actually like I said, actions that are kind of predictable. So when game developers go in and are developing what constitutes a good game, they are looking for things that have a little bit of flux to them, like hold interest, but don't go completely just like off the rails, because then people get annoyed, right? It actually isn't fun to kind of be having a game where everything is sort of like going in a completely unpredictable pattern. So what one of the, I'm quoting from a 2019 article by Nick Statt on how AI will revolutionize the way video games are developed or played. And he says, imagine a virtual world where every character remembered you as a jerk or a criminal and acted with hostility, or a non-playable character central to a game's storyline that never ends up performing the necessary action to reach the next level or embark on a pivotal quest. And so what he says is, typically when you design a game, you want to design for an experience for the player. You want to know what the player will experience when he gets to a point in the game. And for that, if you're going to put AI in there, you want it to be predictable. Now, if you had deep neural networks and evolutionary computation in there, it might come up with something you had never expected, and that's a problem for a designer. The result is that AI in games has remained relatively anemic. So I'm sorry if you're a little disappointed by the machine intelligence that we used in our game, which is very, very basic. So it involves fabricating predictable yet somewhat novel opponents, or what we call NPCs, non-player characters, and generating interaction with lived environment, and that's through behavior decision trees that have algorithmic properties. And I'll talk a little bit more about these aspects as well. So the next part of the question, spiritual lives. What do we mean by spiritual lives? This is a really good audience for helping me develop that. But in this study, we basically defined spirituality, Christian spirituality, to be both beliefs and practices, so both of those things tied to biblical principles, doctrinal theology, and then relationships between individuals, and here we name the triune God, that constitute living out one's faith in the world. And I will just say that off the top, it's important to say that unfortunately, there are a lot of biases in our Christian congregations today, and even among researchers, that think that a lot of disabled people don't necessarily have spiritual lives. So that's kind of one bias we have to get around, and maybe video games is an opportunity to do that. So that's, I think, worth naming. But there's also biases around how disabled folks then kind of not just, I'll talk about this a little bit, not just kind of experience spirituality, but kind of have their own relationship, right, with God. And so that's something we're thinking about in this game. And we're thinking about, of course, we can't study folks' spiritual lives writ large. We're thinking about their relationships with other people in their communities as something we can study, and also the ways they're interacting as they're playing this game that we created. And these are some of the folks that were involved in our fieldwork. So when we're talking about Christian communities, you can see also it's a really small study. And we're talking about Christian communities. We're talking about an RCA church, a PCUSA church, and then actually a Lutheran camp. So all of these folks, we had what we call 3 different research units. They were pre-existing communities. So these are either folks in churches who are playing this game together, or this group of the camper and the parent and the camp counselor, they have ongoing relationships with each other, and so they chose to play the game together. So these are some of the Christian communities that we're thinking of when we're talking about people's spiritual lives and Christian communities. And then the final part of that question, disabled person. So I mentioned a little bit some of the biases that exist in the literature that actually make it difficult sometimes to do studies like the one we were doing. Some of the other biases around disabled persons when it comes to sociality are that they lack the cognitive or social capacity to engage in spiritual growth, fellowship, and discipleship. And then I mentioned that, you have that kind of coupled together with the idea that like people who are online are maybe like doing something kind of socially deviant or like socially extra, like they're not participating in the real thing that is church or something like that. And so what we're doing in this study is really kind of centering the experience of disabled persons. Now, for our players, when we say disabled persons, if you go back to the slide, this was interesting. We reached out to disabled people who love to play video games and that are connected to Christian congregations. So it's an interesting group of folks. And we said, would you like to play this game with your congregation? Who would play with you? So we had to have at least one person who identified as disabled in the congregation, but every single person who was in our study actually identified also as neurodivergent, which was really, really interesting. So when we talk about neurodivergent people, we're talking about people with autism, ADHD, other behavioral and emotional conditions. And we use the term neurodivergence in our study because we're trying to get away from language that pathologizes people. We're trying to think through the neurodiversity movement about neurodivergence as a difference that naturally occurs in the human population. And by moving away from a pathological kind of medical diagnosis, we're also really trying to think about the gifts that neurodivergent folks have for the church. So those were the folks who were playing the game, and you can see there's like a big age range. There's basically someone who's 11, there's someone who's 21, and then there's someone who's in her 40s. And those are the disabled folks that are playing the game with folks in their congregations. But I want to pause also to talk, there's so many pieces that go into the study, so I'm happy to talk more about any of this later. A little bit about kind of the relationship between disability and technology, because this is both a really fruitful intersection and a really fraught intersection. So one of the things that happens with technology, when disabled people are using technology, it's often labeled as assistive, because they are perceived to be beneficiaries of technology, not necessarily users. I mean, if you think about all the technology that we use, we don't call it assistive, right? But so much of it is assistive. So there's a kind of a problem going on there with the way that tech companies often view disabled people. Then sometimes the technology can be positioned as something that will like cure folks of their disabilities. Like for instance, it will allow them to speak, move, do things in ways that they couldn't previously do them, or even kind of that the technology will normalize them. And this is, a real concern because then that doesn't put folks in a position of power necessarily when it comes to using that technology that the company has kind of decided for them. This is what the tech should do. So I mentioned in our study, we really tried to center disabled people as users, right? And we interacted throughout the process in trying to understand how it is that they currently use video games and video game technology and how they want to use it in their Christian congregations. There's a lot of concerns when it comes to disabled people and AI. One of the most kind of vivid illustrations of this is Karen Nakamura's work analyzing self-driving cars and how when they were putting them into production, the cars couldn't recognize, for instance, people in wheelchairs as people and just plowed over them. So there are biases around if you presume a typical person, a typical kind of user, you will edit out, right, a lot of disabled folks and their experiences. And it may not only be like irrelevant to their lives, but it may even be harmful. So what we want to say in our study is that we believe that disabled people and all of us use technology in creative and constructive ways. We create solutions to our problems, not the problems necessarily that people imagine for us, but there are so many interventions that actually come out of disabled communities when it comes to technology that are really important to name. Even something like subtitles, right? Captions, that's become ubiquitous. It's really important to all of us that emerge right from disabled communities. Again, we wouldn't necessarily just call that assistive technology. That's just good technology. So our work in our study was to center disabled persons' knowledge and affinity for video gaming as a resource for Christian communities by creating a video game to their specifications that we then played together. So this is just a slide to kind of emphasize that it's really important to think about disabled people as not just consumers, but users and innovators of technology and AI, and I hope you see that reflected in the study. So I am gonna show a little video in just a second of the video game that we created so you can kind of enter into that world for just a moment. But before I do that, I just have a little graph of the project timeline, because what's important, I think, to talk about here is, as an ethnographic researcher, I started this project by getting to know people and saying, like, what games do you like to play? Let's go online and play them together. And that's how I got a sense of what people enjoy playing, why they enjoy it. In the next phase of the study, after we had selected these 3 research units, I got together with each of the research units and we talked about their goals for playing the game. And what's really important here is that we had fellowship goals in mind, not educational goals. And that's consistent with the literature on disability theology. It's really not the case that disabled people are having trouble with necessarily like education. They're having trouble with access to fellowship and connection with Christian communities. So let's work on that problem. Another issue within the disability literature is that often neurodivergent folks they're pigeonholed into like being recipients of technology in kind of educational or therapeutic goals that are other people's goals. So we didn't want to mess that up. So we were like, we're focusing on creating kind of like a fellowship space for you guys to go deeper in your spirituality. And they really led us in that process, both the neurodivergent players and their Christian communities. And this is what they said. They said, we want a game built in Minecraft. That's a game that we love playing. It's really creative. You get to build stuff, right, and do things. And it really allows you to kind of work with your hands, right, is something a lot of neurodivergent folks find really comforting. It allows you to kind of work on your own projects, but also work with other people. They said, in Minecraft, we want something that's going to allow us to cooperate and collaborate together toward a shared goal. And then they said they wanted it to be in like a village setting. And this is so interesting. They wanted to play with worship. And I was like, really? That doesn't sound that fun or interesting. Like, I'm a pastor and I'm like, you want to just like play with worship in this game? But that's what they wanted. And I'll say more about that, in just a minute. But the video helps demo some of the kind of cooperative elements in the game, some of the worship elements in game, and some of the biblical elements. So I'm going to stop talking and we're going to try to show you guys this video and show you what it was like to play the game. Welcome everyone. We're going to show you a brief demonstration of the Spiritual Loop game created by Erin Raffety and Maria Ince Iglesias in collaboration with the Center of Theological Inquiry, GCU, and the Templeton World Charity Foundation. So here we are, we've entered the game. It's a game that is completely built in Minecraft. We're in adventure mode and we're just looking around and showing you what's available in this world. You can see a bird's eye view of the village here, which is primarily where the play between players takes place. So next we're going to show you a little bit how the game works. We're actually going to progress through all the advancements in the game and show you how you complete the spiritual loop. If we head towards the fountain, we're prompted that this is a fountain for those who desire to drink of eternal water. They'll never be thirsty again. And we're welcome to the game. We can click on this book. It's a passport. It shows us how the spiritual loop works. It gives us an overview about how this is a multiplayer game. We're trying to connect spiritually with other players. And then gives us some updates in terms of what we've completed so far. Nothing. We're at level 0, but then all of the challenges that we can work our way through in the game. If you click on L, you see the advancements, and currently we're looking toward completing some of these advancements. So the first one we're going to do is go and look for our chest. Here we are headed over and we see a couple chests. We try to open one that doesn't have our name associated with it, so we don't have permission. We can't get in that one. But here we go. We have made the advancement to find the chest. You can see that displayed in the right-hand corner, and then we can take all of these resources and see how we might use them in the game. So let's head over and see a little bit about what might be available to us, what we can do in the game. Here's a yellow house plot. It says you can build your house here. Okay, well, why don't we try to do that? Minecraft is a block placing game, so you can see that you can take these blocks from your inventory and start building. Uh-oh, a notification pops up that says your house foundation will not last here, and there's a bot, a witness bot we call them, that pops up. And if you click on that bot, it gives you this hint that you need to build your house upon a rock so that it will stand. This is sandy ground, so that's not going to work, again in accordance with the biblical passage. So we're headed off to find a spot where we can build our house. And here we go, we could build our house here. So we'll start placing blocks again. And players have a certain number of resources that they pull out of their chest, so they can be creative here in building whatever kind of house they want to build. This is really one aspect of Minecraft that people love. It allows you to not only interact with the environment, but to change the environment and to build within it to your creativity's desires. So you see here a player building a fairly elaborate house, and we're kind of speeding this up for time's sake, showing you what might be possible in terms of putting together a house with different blocks. They're deconstructing if you make a mistake, and this house is going to be specifically for this player to use in the game, so you can build whatever you like. There is a minimum number of blocks and items from the inventory that need to be placed in the house in order to complete the Build Your House advancement, which is an individual challenge. Many challenges will involve multiple players, but this challenge you can take your time and complete on your own. So you see the player placing a bed, a chest, a furnace. Oh, there they've made the advancement, Build Your House. So they are finished with that aspect of the game and ready to move on. Headed out to see what else might be going on in this world. There's an overview, a bird's eye view of the house. All right, so we're looking in our advancements to see what's next. There's a prompt to speak to your neighbors. Players can press T, and there they get the chat function. If they type anything to other players, they complete the Speak to Your Neighbors advancement. So that's encouraging communication and conversation between players within the game. Players can even help each other out that way. Oh, here's a bell right in front of the church. If the player strikes the bell, they complete the call to worship advancement. Note, that's actually in level 1, and so players can complete these tasks in any order. It doesn't matter, so they have a lot of freedom to explore and to figure out the game as they go in different patterns kind of each time that they join. So it's getting dark outside, and so in Minecraft the time does change. The sun goes down. We have to get into our house here and lay down and rest up for the night so we can keep our energy. Those hearts on the left high. Those chicken wings on the right are our foods you actually have to eat in Minecraft. So here we're headed over to this pink wall, and we start kind of crushing the blocks here, and notice that some sort of picture is emerging. So we know that we need to complete deconstructing 20 blocks there to complete the advancement. Oh, there we've done enough. So what should we do now? Okay, I guess I'm going to try to keep breaking these blocks and see if I can get to the bottom of this. Whoops, there's a prompt that says you must collaborate with other players, and all players must be online to complete this advancement. So I guess I need some help. So I'll go look for somebody else. Oh, good, Rude Shark 2525 has joined, and so I have another player that I can collaborate with in the game. That's great because a lot of these advancements are going to require that players work together. So I see that this other player is headed over to his chest, probably going to start off by building his house at some point. Oh, wait, actually he has an item in his hand. Oh, he's giving it to me, and then I am giving him a piece of bread. He gave me an apple. So now we've completed the Share to Care advancement. Players need to exchange items at some point in the game to complete that advancement. So we're moving right along. Again, this would not happen this quickly. It's just for the sake of demo for you to see all of the options for play and collaboration in the game. So let's head over to the mural here, because we know we need other players' help to work together. We all need to break these blocks together in order to complete that advancement. But while the other player is doing that, let me look and see what might be going on in the church. That's level 1. I've got more to do. The pastor's welcoming me to the church, to the house of the Lord. I'm going to go in and see what's up. Oh, and then I can also see that the other player just made the individual advancement over at the mural. You get updates on other players and what they're doing in the game, which can be helpful. So exploring the church a little bit. Wow, it's dark in here. Here's the priest coming up and telling me that it would be helpful to light the path. So in the chest I find a torch, and if I place it on the wall here, behold, light the church, the advancement has been completed. Now I'm looking for what other advancements might be necessary within the space of the church in level 1, and I see that there's a gather together for worship, but I'm guessing that I need another player for that. So I'm headed out to see what Rude Shark is doing. Look, there's a witness that appears that says we need even more players to help break these blocks. For the sake of demonstration, we're just gonna let Richard help break all of them and reveal the mural to us, and we will be able to have completed that advancement. But it's telling us that we may have completed level 0, but all players must complete level 1. So we're not done yet. So we need to probably head back to the church. You can see all of the advancements in yellow have been completed, but we've got one left, worship together in the church. So let's head back over there, enter through the side door of the church, and if players again select T, type a prayer into the chat, that will complete the worship together advancement because they're together in the church and they're praying together and they're worshiping together. So we've completed that advancement. At this point, we have made our way through level 0, level 1 very quickly, completing all of the advancements. But as we enter the mural space, a new building appears. This is the community house, and as we get closer, we see that there are food items, loaves and coal there on the ground. As we enter into the community house, we may choose to take the coal and to cook some of that fish up for a meal together, so we can explore this community house as we wish. And then I'm going to follow Rude Shark up the stairs here, and we see that there's a large table, so we might make our way to the table, and also there's a AI bot, a witness there that's asking us to click. So we click and it says celebrate the great feast together here. We have completed the share time together advancement because we're all at the table, but it looks like there's something still left to do. Enjoy the great feast. So I'm gonna maybe take my cue from Rude Shark here. Oh look, Rude Shark has a piece of bread or something, and he's going to click and eat that fish and that bread. And it says gather everyone at the table, so I'm gonna select my bread there and eat, and then together we have completed the great feast, but we have also completed the spiritual loop game. So now players have the opportunity to explore the world fully. Up until this point they were kind of stuck within the village, but now they're in creative mode. They can create whatever they want. They have complete freedom, and the game is complete. So that's an overview of the game. It's obviously a very simple game. And what we did with this is we had a phase where we were getting people's input. And then I did not do the creation of this game. Our technology fellow, Maria Iglesias, did it. And she was amazing in terms of creating what people had in mind. And then we shared it with them and we played it over and over and got their feedback and insights into what was working and what wasn't working and what they wanted within reason that we could do and change. And then in the winter of 2021 and then into 2022 in January and February, I played the game with all of the research units multiple times. We played between 4 and 5 times, an average of 4 and 5 times. One group played like 7 times. And so it was actually one of the best experiences of my research career that I was like, I have to get on and play Minecraft. I just have to get on and play Minecraft. My husband was like, what are you doing? And so the field work that I did, we would all get on Zoom because that was the most familiar medium to them. You can use Discord and other servers, but we would get on Zoom and we would talk as we played, but we also had, you could see the chat feature and all these different things that we were doing. And then I would record all the sessions and I would transcribe the transcript of our conversation, and then I would code and analyze all of that for findings. And then we also had all the data from the server in terms of what people were actually doing in the game. So it's hard for us to isolate the AI elements and tell you exactly how they functioned, but I'm going to tell you a little bit about what we know about that, and then I'm just going to tell you some general findings and then kind of branch out to a wider conversation, I think, about Christian communities and uses of video games and machine intelligence. So you probably saw throughout the video that there are like these white witness characters that pop up. And those non-player characters, their primary function is to offer instruction in the game. They're supposed to help players figure out kind of if they're taking, and we worked with a whole advisory board of theologians, so we talked a lot about sin and like whether you should be able to sin in this world. And this was one of the things that we decided is like if you're taking non-productive or non-collaborative actions, you would just be slowed up in what you were trying to do. You would be giving advice as to how to cooperate with other players and kind of like take better actions, but you would not be like castigated or shut out or anything like that. It just kind of has that function of making it difficult for you to accomplish what you want to in the game. And to win the game, everybody has to work together. Like you saw, everyone has to complete all the individual and the cooperative tasks. So the non-player characters serve to primarily facilitate individual tasks, but they also had an impact on cooperative tasks because they would give you hints in terms of things that if you were doing that were unproductive. The cooperative task, this is like you can see kind of the broad sort of basic structure of the game. The cooperative tasks, as I mentioned, are things that you all have to do together in order to advance in the game. And that was a specific request that the players had, which is really important to say that, again, a lot of times neurodivergent folks are perceived as not wanting to socialize. And this is an example of how, you know, a sort of neurotypical way of thinking about socialization is to like have a discussion or a conversation. But this type of collaborative interaction, like we're going to build something together, we're going to work through something together with our hands, like solve problems, is something really thoughtful and innovative that they wanted in the game that then we were able to build in. Now, this was a little clunky. If you've ever played Minecraft before, it doesn't do this. Like, it is not necessarily a cooperative game at its base, and there are not cooperative tasks. And so this was something that players sometimes like struggled to figure out as they were going through. Ultimately, they really enjoyed the cooperative tasks. But what was interesting is that although they enjoyed the cooperative tasks, they named those as like highly collaborative sites. I would say that collaboration in the game was more user-led. So what I mean by that is when we asked folks about their cooperation and their collaboration in the game, this is a quote from one of the neurodivergent players, and she was saying that actually the collaboration that was happening, like, yeah, it was somewhat around these cooperative tasks, but it was also like they just got together in one of the groups and they were like, let's build a cathedral for our community, which was just a highly creative thing that they were doing together. Or in Minecraft, you dig a lot of mines and caves and people would get trapped and everyone would come together, right, to rescue a player or something like that. So this is interesting because this player is saying, when she's saying that the collaboration wasn't virtual only, I think she's talking about the game. She's saying it wasn't just something that was built into the game, it was something that we brought to the game. So what we saw in every single research unit was that the neurodivergent player emerged as a leader in the research unit. And we think that is highly significant and important to think about because in the spaces of our churches, neurodivergent folks are often presumed as not having like the right skills to lead. But in these spaces, they became the leaders in so many important ways. But I also think it's important when this person is talking about her leadership, she's talking about it as if we all did this together. So what neurodivergent folks are also bringing to, I feel like, our Christian spaces is a critique of leadership, right? They're saying it should be and can be more collaborative. And this is one of the things about the gaming space, right, that kind of often happens organically that's really, really exciting to see. So I'm getting into just some general findings that, you know, may or may not kind of have specific connections to the AI, but I think are important to name. So this is also really interesting. So our neurodivergent players, like the requirement for them to participate in the study is like they had to have some knowledge of video gaming, but the Christian communities, the folks that they were playing with, didn't necessarily have that much knowledge of gaming. And so I think that's one of the reasons you see those folks emerging as leaders in those spaces. But then I was so worried as someone who helped create the game and was running the study, like, oh my gosh, they're going to be so bored, right? Because this is such a simple game and they're just going to tire of it very instantly. And this is a conversation between a neurotypical player and a neurodivergent player talking about whether there was enough direction or instruction in the game. And it was fascinating to me because you can see the comments from the neurotypical player who said, I'm an inexperienced player, like I really didn't know what was going on half the time. But then you also see the neurodivergent player agreeing and saying, there was too little direction in the game. There should have been a little more like push for them. Some things like for the, the dinner thing. It should have been more straightforward on more like we had to be at what time. So this was really exciting to see and fascinating to see that the neurodivergent folks who were really experienced gamers who were leading the gameplay and helping the other players, like one of the players said, that's what I liked about it. I liked being able to help other people. So I think this is a really great kind of opportunity for us as churches to say, even if, what we're able to do in a gaming space or in a digital space is quite simple, the simplicity is maybe not necessarily a problem. And it actually is something, it's kind of a feature of accessibility. I think sometimes we thought when we were designing this game, we're like, oh, we're going to make all these challenges and we'll make sure it's like really fun for people because it's hard. And like our folks were saying, no, you don't have to make it hard. You have to make it accessible first, right? Make it something that everyone can play together and knows what they're doing. And like more instruction is actually better, which was, I thought, really fascinating to see. The other thing that I think the game did is increase accessibility to fellowship, and we know this is something that's really challenging for a lot of neurodivergent folks who are plunged into spaces that are lots of people talking at the same time, and that's the primary way of engaging, and that can be really, really taxing for folks. And so this is a neurodivergent pastor saying that the game functions very much like a coffee hour, only in a way that's accessible to people who don't think the height of great socialization is holding a bad cup of coffee and standing around in a suit and tie. I can see a lot of people my age and younger in a church enjoying just, we're all getting online, we're gaming together, we're chatting. How's your dad doing? Heard he was sick. Do you need a prayer? I can offer one. I think it really adds an element of social engagement that's non-traditional enough to actually be very attractive. So what I think is so important about this particular quotation, is both that fellowship becomes more accessible in this space for certain groups of folks, but also that it's not just about social connection. This is spiritual connection, right? For the pastor to be saying that the kind of conversation that is going on when people don't have to necessarily look at each other, when they're playing with their hands, when they're moving around in different spaces, can allow folks who aren't necessarily neurotypical in the way that they socialize, it can allow that to flourish. And we saw that all the time when folks were playing, people would spontaneously sort of burst into singing hymns. People were having, conversations through the chat. They were typing prayers, right, to each other. So and then I'll say one more thing, is that it also played with religious hierarchies. So a couple things on this point. This was so interesting. I have a paper coming out about this later this year, but the purpose of the game, as I said, was to solve some of these problems around lack of access for neurodivergent folks when it comes to fellowship. And I think, play is a real opportunity for that. But when we did the feedback sessions, a lot of the neurotypical folks in the feedback sessions kept saying things like, well, the Minecraft was good, but when are we going to get to the Bible study part? Or, the Minecraft was good, but it didn't really teach people about the Bible. So there was this focus for them on Christian education that wasn't the case for the neurodivergent folks. They were like, this is wonderful. We're getting to socialize and fellowship, and it's okay that it's simple, right? Because we're working together towards shared goals. We're getting to talk about our Christian faith. And a lot of the neurotypical folks were like, it's not enough in terms of education. And that kind of shows that I think when it comes to neurotypical folks in the church, we're misunderstanding the problem. Neurodivergent folks are saying very clearly, these spaces are inaccessible to us, and we're like, you need more biblical education. And that kind of breaks my heart. So there's an opportunity here to, I think now, kind of to get to the point, is to think about how we use digital spaces and how we think about using AI as an opportunity for play and fellowship. So we talked kind of a lot this morning about some of the challenges when it comes to education. When it comes to AI, it really does often pacify the user or the learner, right? It doesn't keep them active. I see different things going on in the play space. And so I see that as like an opportunity that's rife for the church. In fact, like while I was playing this, it's, the middle of the pandemic. I was so depressed. My daughter is immunocompromised, which is why I'm always wearing my mask. And I couldn't go to church. But when I was online with these folks, like I was in church. It was an amazing experience of fellowship and connection, and a lot of it is because we were playing together. And why are our churches not playing together? And so we can really take these cues and these insights from folks who play video games. And then, what we saw happening in our process is this dynamic feedback loop, right, from neurodivergent folks saying, and then here's some more stuff we can do with the non-player characters, right, and here's some more stuff, right, we can do with the algorithms in the game. We know that it's not very sophisticated, but I think it can move in that direction, and it's really exciting to think about. So ultimately, a lot of what's happening there is something Heidi Campbell talks about a lot in her work, is the way that these online spaces can play with religious hierarchies. So this quote from a neurodivergent pastor is talking about some of the, trends in Christianity in our country that are really independent and non-collaborative, but then how when you're in this gaming space, it's like, forcing you, enticing you to collaborate and connect in all these ways. And so what does it look like to learn from the gaming space, right? Actually as a source of kind of spiritual or theological knowledge, which is a really exciting thing to think about. So I'm going to leave you with two kind of general, more practical ideas. So one is, I came up with a couple of commandments to abide by. One is that I think we should leave this digital dualism, hesitancy, and skepticism behind. I mean, I think it's really good. We've been having this conversation today. However, I think that we should not be afraid to play with technology. I think when we start playing with technology, what happens is we start talking about that technology and what it doesn't do. I also think, though, it's very important to center the users in play, exploration, and development. I think one of the reasons our project did not become abusive in terms of the way the tech was being used is because we're constantly having conversations and getting feedback from the neurodivergent folks that were playing with the game throughout the process. And a lot of times this is the piece that falls out. Like you have tech developers and they maybe do like a focus group in the beginning and say like, oh, what do you want? Like in terms of technology, right, to the group of folks that they're going to serve. And then they go off and they develop it. And then, ideally they do some sort of piloting and feedback. But at that point, it's like really too late because it's expensive stuff. So it is also expensive, I will say. This whole thing was expensive to involve people who are using it at every stage of the development. But this is something we as Christian communities can do, right? We can say, especially if you are serving our folks or you're serving marginalized folks, we are not going to let you just talk over them. Right? We are going to center them emphatically in everything that we do because those folks are not just, as I said, beneficiaries or users, they're innovators themselves, right? Who will increase access to Christian faith. And then finally, if the AI stuff has been a little bit kind of out there, as it is for a lot of us in our practical lives, I just had a couple recommendations for cultivating what I call digital reflexivity in your congregations. So if digital dualism is this false binary that there are like offline and online spaces and they do not commingle, digital reflexivity is the admitting to oneself how we are actually using technology and starting to have that conversation. And I do this a lot with my students, whether that's at Princeton Seminary or Princeton University, in actually getting them to be honest about this thing. So I will ask them to make either a digital diary, which is, it's painstaking, a log of everything they're doing, right? With, oh my gosh, it's like you can only do it for a couple hours because you just get exhausted, but a log of everything you're doing with your technology during the day. And then there's a list of like reflection questions as well. It's kind of, what does that mean, right? And who are you because of that? We were thinking about who are we? But I also like to do it with my theological students as a digital religious diary. So I mentioned, I have this app that I use every morning, and that's a way I'm like kind of connecting with these like communities in the UK or something like that. But when you start to look at a digital religious diary, what that does, I think, for our students is it kind of like breaks down some of this digital dualism. Because I found it was shocking. I work with student researchers, and they're millennials, and I thought, not millennials, they're Gen Z. And I thought, oh my gosh, they're going to be like so excited about using technology because we were doing all this digital ethnography stuff. And they were like the most skeptical people I've ever met. I mean, they were just like, well, it's not real, right? And it's all messed up. And so, I think we can start this conversation by getting more honest about the way that we use technology, and we do not talk about it enough. So on that note, here's some practical resources for you. My colleague, Angela Williams-Gorell, has written this fabulous book called Always On that really helps you to start conversations in your congregation about what it means to use technology in this new media landscape. I mentioned Heidi Campbell's work on networked theology. That's a little old at this point, but really, really helpful for us in kind of conceptualizing what this new networking faith looks like in a digital culture. I have resources at my website, like the video that I just showed. Then there's also a full report on the Center of Theological Inquiry about this study, because I kind of glossed it really fast today. And then my friend Lisa Kafer, who's a pastor, she has this amazing website called The Muddy Fork, and she has all this like curriculum for kids that works with Minecraft. So that would be something you could look into purchasing, but I don't really think you need to buy anything. Like, I truly think that these conversations that I started my field work with, where I just asked people about like, what video game do you love to play? Let's go online and play it and talk about it, was kind of enough, right, to get started. And then hearing their kind of reflections, right, on this experience of being a user of this technology. And I mentioned the machine intelligence remains like a little crude in a lot of these video games, but folks have like really creative, thoughtful insights on it. And the game that we created is like only the tip of the iceberg, right? I think there's so much potential for Christian communities wanting to get connected with video gaming. So that's what I have for you all today. And then I'm excited to hopefully stop a little early, so we can have a conversation over your questions.
Thank you so much. Actually, I'll sit up here. The microphone is open to anyone who has any questions in the room. If you are on Zoom, you can also ask a question, and I will ask it from here.
Hello, thank you so much. As a millennial, I am very excited about the possibilities of these digital spaces that help cultivate community and equity in some ways. And I try to lean into them in my own ministry. I'm a pastor. But if I'm being honest, I'm still wrestling with a sense of dis-ease in my head about diminishing senses of reality that might occur as we go into these spaces. Anecdotally, I have some members of my congregation who are working remotely, and now they can continue to work remotely if they join their workspace digitally. So they put on the headset and all that. And I wonder if there are concerns about, I don't know, is this reality so important? And how do we hold on to that? Or should I dismiss these? I mean, there's exciting thing going on in these spaces, as you pointed out.
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking of Dr. Longo, your comment about your wife, who's a science teacher, and some of the adjustment issues that kids are having in schools. And I think that it's going to be impossible for us at this stage, and I have another article about this, to kind of pry apart the experience of the pandemic and the tremendous loss that we had in that experience with digitality in some ways. And, of course, the pandemic did not take us online. We were already online. But it took a lot of churches and a lot of people online in a really traumatic way. So I wonder if, some of the opportunity here is actually to have conversations, and you'd be very good at this because you're a pastor, around grief when it comes to technology, right, and the pandemic, because I think it's going to be difficult, like I said, for us to kind of pull those apart, but I don't really have the sense that like the digital spaces, right, are to blame or they're the problem. I have more the sense that what we went through and the way we went through it and how it affected us, right, is actually something that we just need to really talk about more. And my experience has been, especially with young people, that they're really eager to have those conversations. My sister is actually a high school math teacher, and she was talking with her class, and she's my twin sister. We're both in our 40s. So she was just sort of like, oh, 9/11 was this like formative experience for my generation. I wonder what yours will be. And her students looked at her and was like, Miss Raffety, we just had it. It was the pandemic. And I mean, no shade to my sister. She's a wonderful teacher. But we're still so much in it, right, that we haven't really taken the time to process and grieve that experience. So I guess that would be like my pastor heart, going out to your pastor heart, to kind of say, doing that work with your congregation, I think will serve them so well. And I think that will help them then when it comes to kind of discerning for themselves, right, where technology is really serving them in their lives and maybe where it's not.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome.
I have a couple questions. All right, I'm going to make it one easy question and one complicated one. One, you mentioned, one clarifying question about the work. You mentioned that the one person said something about not being in a virtual space, and I'm curious if that meant like going out, like extra game collaboration and research. So there's this like, I think you're going to build a cathedral. As someone who, I don't know if the binary between neurodivergent and neurotypical is complicated. But if you're going to build a cathedral, you're going to go research it, and you're going to start talking outside the game, and then you're going to bring that back in. So I was curious if that's what you meant by that, like that non-virtuality.
Yeah. And actually that quote was kind of poor. I should say that quote went on, and the young person explained it was when we were like excavating the caves together, right? It was when we were building the cathedral, those types of things. And so naming things, so it's interesting because she's saying not the virtual space. I think what she meant is not the kind of structure of the game so much, but it actually still is, right? The virtual space. And then, like you said, they're talking as they're playing this game, right? So they're also, I mean, this is like when I'm saying digital culture, we have a really hard time prying apart these things because they're having this conversation about kind of how they're going to do things. I mean, the other thing, I feel like the experience of playing the game is something, for confidentiality reasons, I can't like kind of show you these play sessions, but you might want to think about like a typical play session is really different than a typical coffee hour per se, because there's a lot of silence. There's a lot of like somebody's off doing something in some corner of the game. You have no idea where they are, and it doesn't matter, and who cares, right? This freedom to kind of like not do everything all together at the same time, I talk about this all the time when I talk about disability ministry with congregations, is really, really important, right? Because we don't realize the extent to which we are kind of forcing people to conform, and they feel super, super uncomfortable. And the gaming space, I think, gives just like so much dynamism to that. So yeah, I don't know if that helps answer the simple question, which I managed to talk a lot about.
No, that's fine. Before asking another, I want to make sure that I'm not, does anyone else have a question? If not, I have another one. Yeah, go for it. I can go back over it.
Thank you so much. This is just to say on behalf of everybody, this is amazing. This is really cool. My question really is maybe to spin this a little bit different direction. You've painted you've shown us sort of all the positive ways in which this virtual space is just, builds collaboration and connection. I was wondering, does your study say anything about what bad behavior looks like, what negative behavior looks like, what bad actors would look like, and Or can you say anything about that?
Yeah, so I guess I point to a couple places with that. So one is, I didn't mention this, but a lot of what we did in our work was kind of modeled on the Otcraft community, which I don't know. I should have asked, like, how many people have played Minecraft? Raise your hand if you've played Minecraft. Okay, good. So it's like a good group of people. So there's a community called Otcraft online that was mostly created by parents of autistic children. And what they've done is they have their own server and they have their own rules and they have their own, I think they have the monsters turned on and things, but they might have other different features. You can turn features, on or off in Minecraft. And so they're trying to enforce that space as a really safe space for autistic kids to play. And so we actually were doing similar things in our game. We actually did turn the monsters off, and you can't really see it in the scope of the video, but there's actually a lot of things about the existing environment when you come in that you're not able to alter. So you're not able to just break all the chests, and be like, too bad, nobody gets their resources and stuff like that. Like, you can't do kind of a lot of those like truly destructive things. So I think that we put, kind of some controls on that and limited people's ability to impact the environment in that way. So we didn't see like quote unquote bad behavior, I guess. But a couple things that we did see that are maybe notable here is, and I wish I would have mentioned this, so thank you for asking this question. So we had this set of like individual advancements, and then we had cooperative advancements, because we figured like people want to do things on their own and then they want to do some stuff together. And it was so interesting because none of our neurodivergent players struggled with the individual advancements. Like, it was really easy. I mean, they played Minecraft, they built their house, no problem. But some of our neurotypical players who hadn't played that much, I mean, they like could hardly build their house. They were really struggling. And so in the feedback sessions, it was our neurodivergent players that were like, you should make all the advancements cooperative. And I thought, wow, this is like such a great theological insight, about having all things in common, right, and doing things together, because it wasn't for them. They were like, but I'm watching someone else struggle and they don't need to struggle. Like, I could have helped them. So I mean, maybe I'm telling again like another really rosy side of it, but it basically made me think like this can be a site where instead of having people just like struggling in isolation, when we see people struggle, we can actually kind of build in even more capacities to the game where people can help each other. I will say that people loved when they got to creative mode and the world kind of opened up and they could do whatever they want. The one sort of like critical piece of feedback that we got is people were like, why did it have to end? And we were like, because we don't have enough money. But they like didn't want the game to end, in the sense that, they didn't like this idea that it kind of had like a finite storyline, which is sort of interesting, because I don't think the Christian story itself like has an end, and the game kind of had a little bit more of an end in that sense. I would say that the biggest sort of like bad behavior thing in my mind is this like feedback from neurotypical people that this should be used for education. Like, to me, that's bad behavior. To see people like rejoicing and fellowshipping in this space and to be like, it's not enough. Like, God isn't doing enough here. We need to like co-opt this opportunity to educate people. Like, to me, that was, I didn't actually see any bad behavior demonstrated in the game, but I see some bad impulses in terms of taking this and saying like, play for play's sake is not good enough. God is not active there. We need to instrumentalize play. And I think that's why we don't have enough play in our, I'm like obviously on my soapbox in my pulpit now, but I think that's why we don't have enough play in our Christian congregations. It's because we instrumentalize play. But like, look at these adults playing together, right, in this space. Nothing is broken here. So
to comment on your soapbox, the play at church happens in the youth groups.
Yes.
No, seriously.
No, it does.
It's adult play that doesn't happen.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Hi there. Thanks for being here. I'm John Reif. I graduated last year from Palmer. And one of the things that I grew up remembering in the 80s, playing on an 8-bit system, the church tried to offer these alternatives. I wanted to play Legend of Zelda, and I was being offered like this B version, horrible, unappealing garbage. And I'm like, I just don't care. Yeah. But today, of course, our churches, we spend so much in the mission field, rightly so, sending people to cities that need help, or regions that need help, or countries that need help. What does it look like to you for the church to enter into the gaming space, but with quality that will hold the interest of everybody?
Yeah, I mean, it looks like learning from other gamers who are already doing this work. So for us, that was the Otcrat community, but there's also like Owen Gottlieb is a tremendous gamer that's developed all these games in the Jewish space, and then there's, you know, games in the Islam space. And so I think we have a lot to learn from those folks and the work that they're doing. I also think one of the things that came up for us in this game was, you know, like I said, our communities, they were like, we want to play with worship, right? So like, you know, Minecraft doesn't have a church, it doesn't have worship, it doesn't have these things. They really liked those things, but then some of the feedback that we got was so great because they were like, well, but it's a little bit befuddling from like a theological perspective, because you come into Minecraft and like, if you know anything about Minecraft, you're supposed to like make these resources that are like swords and like weapons. And they were like, I feel like maybe there's something a little bit amiss here when it comes to Christian community. Maybe we should be like turning those, you know, guns, those swords and guns into plowshares or something like that. So we actually realized we were kind of engaging in sort of a parallel construction. I mean, Minecraft is incredibly flexible, so this is great for anyone who wants to create, is you can create kind of within the existing structure of the game. But we were like, this is a real opportunity to examine those spaces, and this is what the, you know, digital religion and playing with religious games does. They analyze what's out there, and they say, actually, there's a lot of kind of religious elements that we can just talk about in these games as they are, right? So that's one path. And then another path with Minecraft is just to say, like, there's already this really interesting kind of theological stuff going on. How do we integrate, right, what we're doing into that space so it doesn't feel like it's competing or it's like auxiliary and weird, but it's actually something that kind of supports what the game is already up to. I think that might be the exciting thing to think about. And that actually kind of starts to create all these, you know, sort of alternate conversations. I think, you know, if we really think about this as a real space, right, these worlds as like real worlds to people, it's like, what does it mean to be Christian or ethical in this particular world? Yeah.
Can I ask a follow-up on the moderation question that a lot of digital communities, both, you know, in live chat situations as well as in communities on Reddit and Discord, will use bots to moderate content, because otherwise the amount of human power you would need to be watching over all of the content that's being said in there is just impossible. And so we kind of train these bots to identify things that are offensive, that are dangerous, and then don't allow them. And I would imagine in spaces in which you're trying to create a safer space than just the wild west of the internet, and the worst of people when they're anonymous, you know, there's this loud outcry in the defense of free speech and public expression, you know, that don't force your narrow-minded morality onto me and whatnot. Do you have a sense of the balance between AI moderation and also the freedom to allow people to have difficult conversations? Yeah.
So, like I said, it's so hard for us to, like, we feel like there's so much more for work for us to do, because this is very much a pilot study, and so we like can't really isolate particular elements in the game. The other thing is that I was very much in the groups playing a role of mentorship. Although I was kind of helping people figure out how to play the game, I'm not really an expert in Minecraft, but I would help them as far as I could. But I was also like fostering that environment, right, and that spiritual conversation, and kind of playing somewhat of like a big, like a friend or something, you know what I mean? And people probably weren't going to say weird things, right, while I was on there. However, the ultimate like dream that we have for this game and this gaming space after going through this study is, and seeing the leadership of neurodivergent players emerge, is like they should be the mentors and the monitors, right? This should be their gaming space. And so I think to that question, they should be the ones, right, who would develop whatever rules or work with whatever, bots or systems that they want to manage this space. We actually applied for further funding to do that through NSF, and we didn't get it. It's, incredibly competitive. But I actually would like to see, I worry about future iterations of this project, taking that leadership element away from neurodivergent folks. I actually think that needs to be allowed to fully flourish. And then I can see this being such an amazing community where we actually learn more about neurodivergent spirituality, because those folks are, mentoring each other, right? And they're developing and continuing to contribute the game. So that's my dream answer to that question.
I love it, because the alternative, and then I'll let you talk, is that those of you who are on TikTok, which I'm sure all of you are, regular users, there's a whole new vernacular that's forming to get around the algorithmic censors. Mm-hmm. Because if you say in your TikTok video that somebody got killed, it'll get flagged. Mm-hmm. But if you say that person got unalived, it will not get flagged. Mm-hmm. If you say sex, it'll get flagged. If you say segs, S-E-G-G-S, it will not get flagged. So there's this whole vernacular that's forming as a way of getting around AI-moderated filters that's not actually doing anything, right? Because it's not that sort of human-led communal space that you're talking about. That's fascinating. Thank you.
I think I hear you from your soapbox, by the way. But, so you talked about learning from neurodivergent individuals and whatnot, and I was wondering if that is going anywhere in terms of more generalities. So in terms of just help one another, right? Like it's not rocket science in a way, right? And just the playing in the community and coming together just to be together and to be community. And then also with the playing with the hierarchies, right? And it's like we don't, we can learn together. We don't need to be,
Yeah. So, I mean, my, this project was really instrumental, I think, in my own learning about neurodivergent folks and what they have to offer to the church, but then also to theological education. I have a special issue coming out in the Journal of Disability and Religion on neurodiversity and theological education. And believe it or not, that's like the first time we're using the term neurodiversity in that journal, and theological education together, which shows you that we're behind. We're as a church, we're just really behind. And I think I created a whole curriculum called Cultivating God's Brain Forest that is available through the Institute for Youth Ministry at Princeton Theological Seminary, and that's for youth workers that are wanting to be in ministry with neurodivergent youth, and equipping them kind of how to do that well. When we applied for that grant, it was through Fuller Theological Seminary, and we applied for it, and we said, we want to do this work with neurodivergent young people, and here's what we're passionate about. And Fuller was awesome, but they were like, can you just not use the term neurodiversity? And we were like, why? And they were like, because it's just such a mouthful, and it feels like an academic term, and nobody is using that. And we were like, I'm sorry, that comes out of the autism rights movement. That's a that's a term that folks have come up with to self-describe. It's also, like I said, it's an anti-pathologizing term. So, I mean, I think to your question, this sounds very specific, but let's use these terms, right? That folks are using to self-describe themselves as a form of respect, and also to get this conversation going, because our young people, I mean, I teach, like I said, at Princeton University, I teach a course on disability, and they come into the class and they're totally open, right, to talk about their experiences of disability. And, I think as a church, we're not as open, right? We're not having those conversations right in that space. But I would say out of that project that we did with Cultivating God's Brain Forest, what we talked about are practices like prayer. We talked about practices like, obviously, worship. And we talked about the way in which neurodivergent folks call us to different ways of practicing prayer. And I mean, I literally think what we were doing in the video game space was absolutely a form of prayer. If you think about, I'm just thinking about when we were talking about Collegeville and Benedictine monks and, something like praying the rosary. It's like you're playing the video game. You're moving through this space and your hands are moving right in this way that is keeping your mind really focused and quiet and open and alive. And that was a really beautiful thing to see. And so often when it comes to neurodivergent folks, there's tons of research on this, on the double empathy problem, but the perception from neurotypical people is that this person doesn't want to communicate because they might be looking away, they might be avoiding eye contact. That might be their bid to communicate. They're looking away because in order to maintain a conversation with you, it is too taxing, right, for them to look you in the eye, so they're looking away. But your perception is they don't want to talk to me, and you shut down. You shut down. So then communication shuts down. So I think that a lot of it for neurotypical people is kind of becoming a little bit more conversant in what might work better for neurodivergent people, but also becoming a little bit more self-attentive to who we are and kind of how we shut down conversation. Like I said, one of the pieces that we got in terms of the feedback in the game from a neurotypical player was, well, we just didn't have any discussion about what we were doing, so it wasn't good enough. And you were like, yeah, we were not going to have any discussion. That was the whole point, is we were trying something different, right, and playing the game together. But it's so difficult for us to break out of these, typical ways of this is how we do education, right? We have kind of this moment, we're doing this thing, and then we reflect on it through discussion, we do all these things. So I think, we're really just at the precipice of new ways of doing that, and I'm really excited about it.
So a lot of what you said just was really speaking to me. The person who I said that when I was on the panel, who I said I've met and have never actually met in person, talked to a lot. I was playing Halo with him where I met him last night, and we were talking about his marital problems. And so these spaces really can be genuine, and you were talking about how they are real in a lot of senses. I'm also curious, though, about how in your pastoral role you might have dealt with trying to get people to understand both that it is real and also it's not real, right? I forget if it's Brad or Brian Burmeister, I think, in the early 2000s, did a lot of work on the violent video games that they actually don't lead to violence, right? And that when you're playing Halo and you are killing someone, it's not actually like, that's not what we're feeling, right? I'm talking to him about his marriage while we're going through and doing all of this quote unquote killing, right? And so with, that was something my parents had a lot of hard time understanding when I was younger. And I could see if we're trying to meet people where they're at, kids, and they are doing these games, like that it's both real and not real, and how to get people to kind of understand that and be able to reach people in some of these spaces. Because I think a lot of people are like me with my undergrads. Oh, you guys with your TikToks and your new whatever. I don't like it. But if that's where they're at, it's a good place.
Thank you for bringing that up. I think this is one of the misconceptions when people think about video games as like socially deviant spaces. It is because it's mapped onto that idea that like, oh yeah, this violence, right, that we're seeing in our culture is linked to that, and it's not, right? People have disproved that. That's a really interesting way of putting it. I'm gonna have to think a little bit more about that. The couple things that do come to mind, I was getting a lot of feedback or pushback from one of the theologians on the advisory board who was kind of saying like, but what if this stays within the space of the game? You know what I mean? In terms of like neurodivergent leadership, like this is really nice, but then is it going to translate? And I can say, like, I cannot tell you, ethnographic research is not very good at doing cause and effect, but I can tell you anecdotally, so one of the folks that was playing the game, he's an autistic organist in his 20s, he attends a church, and so he kind of contributes his gifts in that way. And while we were playing this game together, he and his pastor were playing the game together, she often has him, he's obviously doing music all the time, but she takes a long break after Christmas, and she actually had him take over not just like leadership of the music, but worship leadership for the congregation for those 2 weeks. And there's no way that I can say, oh, well, it's because we were playing the game and she saw him in a different way. But I do think she did see him in a different way in the game, in what he brought to the game. And it was over the course of the actual gameplay that occurred. And then we talked about that a lot, right, in the space of the game, because we're in this church, you know. I'm like, oh, yeah, he was, you know, doing the whole thing. It was amazing, right? So I think I agree with you. I think there's got to be a way that we talk about how, you know, these, like, and for me, it is kind of that spiritual, this is a spiritual formation or spiritual leadership. There's got to be a way that we talk about that as like highly real, right? And maybe even like, you know, someone mentioned the Holy Spirit earlier, spirit-led, and really important to name that. I think, like, to me, that like feels like the work of the Spirit, right? Somehow in the midst of this game. But of course it doesn't have, it's like not a one-to-one correlation, right? It's not that, you know, he was up pretending to lead worship in this church and like that, you know, is what kind of led to this change. But I think, you know, the kind of anthropologist in me says this is an opportunity to continue to study these spaces and to just see how this organically plays out. Because what you mentioned about playing Halo with your friend and the conversations you were having, what is like not apparent in the data, but is like the backstory. One of these groups totally fell apart. It was like the pastor left her church during the study. You know, this kind of stuff happens. And then she's like, I still want to play. And I'm like, I want you to play too. And she's like, can I play with my mom? And I'm like, you know, because her mom was really isolated in Idaho or something like that. I'm like, yeah, sure, play with your mom, whatever. What it amounted to is like, we get on and we play this game, and she is processing the loss of this church. And she said it's the thing that like kept her in ministry, was like playing, being able to come into this place, play this game, connect with other people, obviously that she knew, like cared about her, talk openly. Pastors don't have a lot of space to do this. And the game provided that opportunity for it. So, I mean, I think too, you just bringing that up is really helpful, because I think we just like don't talk about this. Like it feels sometimes you feel ashamed. I feel ashamed when I say like, I have a friend that I've never met. Like it sounds weird. But like, I actually think pastors in the room, it's like, preach on this stuff, like from the pulpit, teach on this stuff, talk a little bit more about your digital life, right, with your congregation, because people then will come and talk to you. And I think this is where, like I said, we're behaving like digital duelists when that's not the world that we live in.
Yeah. We have a question on Zoom from Joshua Porter. Joshua says, Dr. Raffety, thank you for teaching us today. My question revolves around Christians being collaborators with the world around us. Jesus gave us the primary commands to love God and love others. This requires relationship. This requires collaboration. This requires cooperation. This requires presence within the community around us. Unfortunately, I'm concerned that much of the Christian church is more concerned about what is wrong and sinful in the world and the potentials for evil, that we alienate ourselves from the world and the community around us. How can we encourage each other to embrace and even utilize newer technologies in ways to be in relationship, collaboration, and cooperation with the world around us? And how can we start thinking about the incredible potentials of these technologies instead of being paralyzed by the fear of its negative potentials?
Well, one of the things that comes to mind is celebrate play, and celebrate it in all spaces and places that you see it. And I think of the fact that we hosted my 16-year-old niece this summer, and she just wants to talk about these anime shows that she loves so much. And but the people that listen to her talk about that, and who really truly listen in such that they can, you know, rejoice with her when she's rejoicing, that is, I think, the Christian witness. And far two people do that in her life. I think so many people, like I said, are dismissive towards those things that bring her joy, such that she has bottled them up. She's not going to share them with other people, and people, you know, call her weird and tell her the things that she cares about doesn't matter. And I think, you know, the biggest connection we can have in life, it's actually, you know, there's the weep with those who weep, right, command, but the rejoice with those who rejoice. Like when you're super happy about something, think about who you want to share it with. And it's somebody like you love so much, because you know they'll get it, right? We need to be more of those people who get it, even if we kind of don't get it. And my thing, before I played this, like, I had barely played video games. And, I got on there, and the joy that people had was just contagious. And they were teaching me a lot, and I wanted to be there with them. And I think that sounds probably far too simple, but like, what if we were a church that was known for the way that we played? And what if we were a church that was known for rejoicing with people who rejoice? Like, we would be doing a lot, and I think with this, idea of like, well, we're too kind of fixated on what's wrong or what's evil or what's bad. I think we are known by our actions, right? So yeah, I guess if that's what we're doing, I really don't want any part with the church, right? But if what we're doing is really being able to, celebrate, I think this play and this joy that folks have, I think we just get so much nearer to God in those moments. And I don't think we need to worry so much about where that's happening.
Space. I think oftentimes in conversations around gender, there's a stereotype that maybe like men don't talk very much and women do. I want to break that stereotype. I don't think we should break that stereotype, but I do wonder if gender plays into this at all, like how that maps onto these. Mm-hmm. Like maybe that stereotype comes from differing levels of neurodiversity across gender, et cetera. I don't know. Mm-hmm. The research. But I am curious how gender plays into that, because like something Dr. Longo brought up was this sense that men are increasingly alienated and like they don't have a lot of connections in general. And something, as someone who grew up kind of socialized as a man, I think about it is like, yeah, the spaces where I feel the most comfortable in interacting with other men is often collaborative spaces where we're working on something together. Yeah. I'm not like a sports person, so the competition doesn't do it for me, but like I'm definitely a tabletop gaming person and I play tons of games, and those are the spaces where I'm able to connect with other men in a way that feels intimate and compassionate. I'm curious if gender came up at all, or if because the sample was small and you focused on neurodiversity, like if that was less so. Yeah, I mean, it's such a small sample, so there's like really nothing I could say about it from the particular study, but I do think, a couple things, like, we have a really big issue in this country with anger among men, right? That like when you see men experiencing depression, it often looks more like anger. And so I think, the outlet of video gaming, right, for some folks can be really, really healthy, right? And this is where but we've labeled it deviant, we've labeled it wrong, right? We've made people feel bad. We've made them feel like it's a lesser form of sociality. I think that's a big problem, right? And I think it has to be all about what are you actually doing in that space, right? And what are you getting out of it? And I think it makes perfect sense that for many, many people, not just for neurodivergent people, that, when it comes to, and in fact, like in the R&R, I got on this article about Christian education. Somebody was asking me, like, we need to talk a little bit more about interaction and what it means to interact, right? Because the problem is, from the neurotypical standpoint, you say interaction and somebody's like talking, discussion, right? But interaction, in lots of spaces can be a shared goal and actually like putting in the sweat, right? Or doing something technical together. And that I think, to kind of augment the comments I made on play, it's like we don't have enough of that, right? Sometimes going on in our Christian spaces and our congregations. And that's why sometimes when you have at that church fellowship night some silly game, that people actually experience more fellowship there, right, than they do in coffee hours. So I mean, I think you're onto something. I can't say anything like distinctively from the literature with respect to that, but I think ultimately too what it comes down to, I think, is not like denigrating right, each other's joy and spaces, and really asking the questions, and not just asking the questions, but like playing with someone. Because like that work that I did initially to get this project going and playing with people, not all those people, of course, were involved in the study, but one of those people was an 8-year-old neurodivergent boy.
And he didn't have anybody who cared about his games. And I got to get online with him, and he got to show me, Miss Erin, oh, let me show you this thing that I'm building. Oh, Miss Erin, let me take you over here. Now I'm going to tell you how this works. I'm going to tell you. And I just saw this boy just flourishing, right? This guy's great. And like, he is labeled a problem in his school. But in this space, I mean, he's a leader, and he has tons to give. And so we like, as Christians, right, like, we cannot think that just because we know this guy in the space of the school, we know him, right? Go online with him and you really see his gifts bubble up. And then you have to think, like, how can I help this guy flourish, right? Because he's got so much to give.
Yeah, I worked for Habitat for a while.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
where there was a space where you would get like some older communities that would come in and volunteer, and it was a space of collaboration and like construction, literally, where you got to like do that kind of work together. And I worry that those spaces are going away for a variety of reasons. People aren't plugging in the same way. So I'm really excited to hear more about that. Thank you.
No, thank you. Thank you for your questions.
Yeah. As the next question asker comes up, I'd like to offer a practical idea for any of you pastors or church leaders out there. One of the things that we do in our church is called an embodied worship, in which we come up with something different every week that is connected to the theme of the day, that engages people's bodies. That's not just listening or singing. And we invite people to do it at the beginning. We explain it that it's an activity we're going to do. Feel free to get up at any point for the rest of the time we're together and do the thing. So like during Advent, we put out a Scrabble board, and we started with a word that was connected to the theme, and then we asked people to get up, look at the remaining words, and put down whatever is speaking to your heart in that moment during the service. And then at the end, we made this kind of collaborative Scrabble art board. This week, we're doing a sort of collaborative art project that I'm going to turn into a t-shirt. We had somebody who joined the church recently, and she said, the first time I visited, we did this art project, and I thought, wow, this is kind of a fun, special thing. And then I came back, and you did something else. And I thought, this is a weird church. I love it. It's so much fun. I don't know what you're going to do next. So it's there's lots of ideas online for these kinds of things, though you typically will only find them in spaces where people are providing information, resources for ministries to neurodivergent people, people who are trying to create ministries for people with autism, have a lot of great ideas that we are using for everyone. That has just been spectacular. So just wanted to throw that out there for all of you pastors.
Thank you. So I'm really interested in this concept you introduced at the end, digital reflexivity. One of the things I've been noticing in my teenagers' social circles and also with my undergraduates is the way that the language of video games becomes a kind of narrative framework through which they're interpreting their real life experience. So like things that I've heard said are like, that group of kids over there, those are the NPCs, or which sounds harsh, but or the way that the language of open world video games and cutscenes can become a metaphor through which they start interpreting their own life the first few weeks of college. And one of the things that I'm hearing you say is that this space that was created virtually through Minecraft also became a kind of lens for critique of contemporary worship spaces. So I'm wondering if you could say a little bit more about the way that the language and the worlds that are created online can be useful as a lens or a narrative framework or another way to critique and maybe even judge the church in our contemporary world.
I've heard those terms too, although I haven't heard Gosh referring to a group of kids as the NPCs. But I do think this is exactly where I would love to see kind of our next studies go, is especially the anthropologist in me, like really attending to people's language and their, the categories that they're using to organize their lives. And I think in this way, like young people, are the innovators here. They have a lot to teach us. I think there were a couple findings that maybe I didn't do a great job sort of glossing from the study about neurodivergent spirituality. And this is where I think like we kind of have, there are like a lot of critiques of kind of like, yeah, this worship space doesn't work for me and all this stuff. But then it's kind of like, but what else is there, right? And like, how do we do it? And what are the critiques here? And so one of the ones that, we noticed was this idea of kind of drawing us toward more collaborative leadership styles, right? So like in this way that we would like play the game together, this actually like, this is just body of Christ stuff, right? But it's just lived out in a different way. So even thinking of the body of Christ, right, as a group of gamers and kind of each playing different roles, right? And having different roles that they play that are all very important and necessary toward kind of building something up together, I think is one thing that came out a little bit. Other things that came out in terms of spirituality, trying to think, would have to do with, again, the kind of pieces about like discussion, right? Having such like a archetypal kind of like feature in our worship and spaces. And so especially when it comes to, and that's sort of where I was like thinking this is really interesting because there is this kind of critical pushback against education and how we do it. But I think in this particular practice of gaming, there are actually resources for Christian education if we choose to receive them. And I think part of that is kind of this idea of attending to the access in play. I think that, like I said, we thought that we needed to create enough kind of struggle and strife in this game to make it interesting. And all of our players are like, no, it could just have more direction. I think that has radical insights, right, for our communities. I think, so often we think when someone comes into our worship space that they know what to do, right? And they know what we're up to. But actually, like, all of that stuff is subtext, right? Like, very little of that is actually designed for, right, someone who's coming in and who's new to the space to not just, like, we talk about being welcome. Forget that. To know how to do it, right? To actually know kind of the pieces, right, and what's needed. And so I think in that way, neurodivergent folks are giving us so many good insights about the things that, like, we think are taken for granted in our communities, but we actually need to make really explicit, and that actually would serve everybody else. I mean, I don't want to like pick on the Episcopalians because I love them, but oh my gosh, they have so many hymnals. And like when you go into one of those spaces, right, and you're trying to, and it requires like dexterity, right, to get to the books. I love the Episcopalians, but this is hard. And it requires also a lot of like, I don't know what these abbreviations mean, right, in the bulletin to actually choose the thing. And like a lot of people, you just shut down, right, because you say, oh, this isn't for me. Like clearly, I haven't been here, right, for 30 years and I have no idea what we're doing. And so like, how can we kind of provide that level of like, gracious instruction, right, through everything we do, and I'm trying to do this so much for my students as well, right, because I end up with a lot of disabled students in my classes, and they teach me so much about kind of like, this would be helpful for me, this would be helpful for me, and then my, responsibility as an educator is to be able to listen, and then I don't have to do it all. Right? I can kind of say to them, okay, so can we work on this together so that we can make this more broadly accessible? And the class is, better every time I teach it. Can we think about our worship spaces that way, right? Because it's like, I think sometimes we're just like, well, it's good enough. Like this is how we do it, right? But there's so much more. Yeah.
Thank you. All right. There's time for one question if it's very quick. If not... Well, thank you so very much for your time, for being here, for your expertise.